My name is Amy Spring and I am faculty in sociology. In my mind, the biggest reason we need to work together across multiple disciplines is because climate change is a human-created problem. Some of the consequences manifest as natural disasters, like floods, hurricanes, heat waves, and wildfires, but there is nothing natural about the rate at which these disasters are getting worse. We have to understand climate change as a social crisis, with social consequences and therefore social solutions. So in addition to understanding the science behind climate change and the technological solutions, we need to understand what it is about the human condition that created the problem. I am someone who is very skeptical of the idea that we as a society will be able to invent our way out of climate change. I think we have to fix the underlying social systems of inequality, like capitalism, consumerism, and racism. These systems benefit the people at the top while often ignoring the collective interests like environmental issues. If we see climate change as the culmination of these toxic systems, then we know we need to change them, and that will take everybody. We need the natural sciences to quantify the scope of the problem. We need scientists and engineers to give us better technologies. We need the social scientists to pick apart that human element to help us understand how we go about getting broad social support for the big systemic changes we need to make. And we need artists and writers and musicians to help give us that vision for a different way of living. Within sociology, I am part of the subfield of demography, which asks questions related to population, like how many people are living on Earth and how many people can the Earth support. From demographers, we know that it took all of human history up until about the year 1800 for the Earth's population to reach 1 billion people. Now we are adding another billion people around every 12 years. In November 2022, the world crossed the threshold to 8 billion people. So demographers don't think that we are going to grow in population indefinitely. The world's population growth is slowing down. Some experts think we might max out around 11 or 12 billion people. But still, that is a lot of people for the Earth to support. However, in my academic discipline, we also talk about how the sheer number of people is far less important than the way those people are living. We ask questions in sociology like, how do you reduce inequality between groups so that you don't have this imbalance of power between the people at the top of the social hierarchy who are consuming more than their fair share of the resources and who are largely responsible for the problem of climate change, and the people with less power who are the ones being harmed. Sociologists often focus on concepts like environmental racism, which is the disproportionate impact of environmental problems on communities of color, and the systematic exclusion of people of color from leadership roles in environmental decisions. Sociologists also often focus on the environmental justice framework, which is the idea that environmental harms like pollution or natural disasters are distributed unevenly, as are environmental benefits like access to parks or wilderness areas. And this unevenness is because of the way society is structured. Therefore, solving environmental problems requires fundamental social change, especially if we are going to live sustainably with 11 billion people. Yes, one of the issues we are seeing in Atlanta is something scholars call climate gentrification. It is also known as green gentrification, and this occurs when projects that are meant to make cities more sustainable, like green space and buffer zones, end up increasing property values in the area and leading to problems with housing affordability for local residents. An example of climate gentrification in Atlanta is what has happened in the neighborhood of Peoplestown, which is just southeast of downtown Atlanta. Peoplestown has had a major problem with flooding because, in an example of environmental racism, the sewage system in this majority Black neighborhood was never built right and was falling apart. And so to solve the flooding problem, the city wanted to build a water retention pond, but there were houses in the way. So they used their power of eminent domain to tell people they had to move. And some residents said no, and they fought with the city for a decade to be able to stay in their homes. Now, recently, they settled with the city and the plans for the pond are moving forward. So although it seems to be resolved for those families, we still need to ask what happens next. With the loss of that affordable housing and the new pond, property values in the neighborhood are probably going to go up unless we put protections in place. We also see this in other projects that are supposed to promote sustainability in Atlanta, like the Beltline, where the property values around it have skyrocketed. So green space is wonderful, but it can't come at the expense of affordable housing. These examples demonstrate just how challenging it will be to find equitable solutions to climate change. We have to keep a close eye on environmental justice. And the best way to do that is to have the people most impacted by climate change lead the way to the solutions. One of the ways students are affected is in their everyday choices. A lot of students have probably heard about their ecological footprint, which is the impact of all of our choices and activities on the environment. And many of us know what we are supposed to do to reduce our ecological footprint. We're supposed to drive less, take public transportation, eat less meat, eat organic, and things like that. The list goes on and on. But the thing is, and I think it's especially relevant for students, that oftentimes making these more environmentally friendly choices costs more money. The average student can't necessarily afford fair trade, ethical, organic products, or they might aspire to take public transportation, but maybe the public transit doesn't even go near their place of work. And they've got to get to work on time, maybe they have kids to pick up. So I think it is frustrating for students and people in general to feel like they want to help, but that their options are limited by this system we are stuck in, which doesn't really give the space to slow down and evaluate our choices and enable us to make changes. So this is again where the concept of environmental justice comes in, because it's not just about making people aware that there are more environmentally friendly choices, but also giving people the wherewithal to be able to make these choices. And so this is yet another demonstration of how solving the environmental crisis will require a more holistic approach. True and lasting environmental justice will have to address all the other areas of injustice too, so that everybody is empowered to make different choices. My advice would be to start expanding who you picture when you picture an environmentalist. Sometimes the environmental movement gets a reputation for being a white space, and also sometimes a male space. But there is truth to this. A 2014 report found that ethnic minorities occupied less than 12% of leadership positions in environmental organizations, even though they comprised about 38% of the US population. And more than 70% of the presidents and chairs of the boards of environmental organizations are men. These statistics don't even account for the lack of other types of diversity, including culture, class, sexual orientation, age, or geographic location. If we are going to find solutions to climate change, there must be a diversity of people at the table. So I would encourage people to learn about and promote environmentalists from a diversity of backgrounds. I would tell them to Google Dorceta Taylor. She is the author of the report I mentioned and a professor at Yale. There are some interviews with her online where she talks passionately about who people tend to picture when they picture an environmentalist, and how normally it isn't an older Black woman like her. She actually tells the story of being mistaken for the janitor at an environmental conference where she was the keynote speaker. Or I would tell them to Google Vanessa Nakate. She is a young climate activist from Uganda. She wrote a great book called A Bigger Picture, and in it she talks about going to a youth climate summit and posing for a picture with some other climate activists who were there, who were all from Europe. And when the media posted the picture, they cropped Vanessa Nakate out. She was the one non-white activist in the picture and the one activist from the Global South, and they cropped her out. In response, Nakate said, they didn't just erase a person, they erased a whole continent. So yes, I would encourage people to learn about environmentalists and climate activists from around the world and to promote their ideas. And I would encourage people to think about how to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in their own spaces too.